Everybody, Rob Bertholf here, and we're continuing along the Awakening series, and this is Public Secrets. And big picture, in this course, we're going to be looking at the psychological need to belong and how our desire to be included or even exclude others can be used against us. And we'll briefly cover some feeder organizations for secret societies and our instructions the Bible gives us that we should not be a part of these. Next, we're going to talk through the secret and not so secret societies, symbolism and the different meanings that they use to collect, confuse, and control the masses, and how we can understand what is light and what is darkness. To start off, we have to address kind of the need to belong. And I think there's two pieces to this when we think about self-exaltation and self-preservation. I think starting off with self-preservation, we have this psychology of inclusivity, or this desire to feel included. And there's a well-documented this desire for interpersonal attachment is a fundamental human motivation. But the problem is, or the question we should ask at least, is can this desire to belong be manipulated? And I'll cover this a lot more in the next course, I believe it is, which is cults and brands. And in this, really, we just talk about the concept of how brands tap into this desire for us to fit in by creating visual imagery and other representations where we attach our identity to a brand's identity. And this is the same thing that happens around sports teams, how sports can pull people in and they rally around that. Now, again, I'm going to cover that a little bit more in the course on manufacturing consent, where we talk about this concept of groupthink. And for those that have already taken that course, we already know that groupthink is a term coined by Irving Janis, which really talks about the concept of people's desire for harmony or conformity can disturb or disrupt their decision-making outcomes. And so, I cover this a lot more in detail in the previous course, but really this concept that our desire to want to fit in, and also this idea that we are looking around and other people aren't objecting to something, as an example, is a very interesting dynamic. So if there's a few dominant voices, they're able to sway a large number of people who keep silent, thinking that the person next to them is keeping silent because of this, this consent or unstated agreement. Now, when we start looking at, there are, in these scenarios, individuals can actually manipulate this. And so it's called the pack animal or the pack hunter concept, right? And this is this idea that when we look at individuals can work together with other members of the same species. So you can think about this as lions, dogs, hyenas, as well as what we're talking about right now in humans. But there's this concept that comes out of social predators, and how they're able to, these kind of dominant voices in the room, or these kind of dominant members, can ultimately take control over an entire group. We see how animals in numbers have more confidence and capacity and capability to hunt and kill their prey. So teamwork can be a really powerful and beautiful thing, but it can also have a dark side. And so, again, the question to ask is, can this desire to work together and to, have this harmony ultimately be manipulated? When we look at clinical psychologists, mental health practitioners, and those that are even in the social psychology field, they've spent years studying this group psychology concepts in depth, investigating why our behaviors and decision-making tend to differ when we're in a group versus when we're alone. And the takeaway is that groups normalize and intensify our behavior. And so ultimately, this is just a warning sign to recognize when we're in does our desire to fit in, does our desire for inclusivity allow us to compromise our values and our morals? Now, the next kind of piece we'll tackle is the psychology of exclusivity, right? So this is this strong desire potentially for self-exaltation. And, to many, the velvet rope triggers this psychological need to belong and to get past that barrier. And this is why, gated communities exist. It's why private country clubs and VIP member access, Rolex clubs, Ivy League schools, these all provide illusions of exclusivity. And ultimately, it's that, they're capitalizing on that desire to stand apart. And so with that, we see that these also form into groups. This is what society is kind of hardwired into us, is this what we see with like school fraternities, this desire to, for inclusivity, or in many instances here, exclusivity. And we can see the dangers and what happens in just the fraternity setting, right? Many behaviors in this group setting, coupled with a strong desire to belong, lead to very tragic outcomes, as we've seen. Many studies, and according to research involved, says that hazing, people that are involved in hazing don't even recognize it while it's happening to them. And many see it as a rite of passage of humiliation, right, and telling them later to do the same thing to others, and believing that the code of silence is important. So all of this, there starts to build these traits, these concepts, starts to normalize this concept of humiliation, rite of passage, and code of silence. And so there's lessons to be learned from this, and that's really the danger of desiring to fit in or to stand out. And so it's important that we look inward and see, do I have that desire? And what's the reason I want to join this fraternity or this secret society? What am I missing in my life? Or what's the catalyst? What's the deep down motivator that wants to engage in this? Now, we're given instructions from the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy, so let's read some of those. The first is in Romans 12:2, reminds us not to be changed by this world, by a desire to fitting in, right? But instead focus on the will of God and our higher calling. This world, and acclimating to this world, is not going to do us any favors. And we should be really looking at how can we acclimate to the next world, to the higher, to our higher calling. We read that there are those who question whether it's right for Christians to belong to secret societies. And, this is kind of from evangelism. It says, let all consider the scripture just quoted. If we are Christians at all, we must be Christians everywhere and must consider and heed the counsel given to make us Christians according to the standard of God's will. And it continues on. The big picture is thinking about who we associate with. And Isaiah tells us that forming associations with the world warns us, ye shall be broken in pieces, and gird yourself, and ye shall be broken. So it's this warning about understanding, by creating confederacies with the world, we're ultimately not in alignment of God. And Jesus answered, I have spoken openly. He says, in secret I've said nothing. So following Jesus' lead, there's this idea that we should be, should not be forming secret groups and societies with special handshakes. And, the other aspect of this is that Jesus warned, through Paul, that we should not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? Now there's another theme here, and that's what communion has light and darkness. And we're going to pick up on this theme in a little bit as we kind of start talking about the esoteric meanings of things. But the bigger picture right now is just to understand that we are called to be apart from the world. Now, there's dangers, right? The Lord's injunction to all alliances in which parties are brought into intimate association. There's a danger if we are really tightly forming a brotherhood with those who are not in alignment with God's desire for us and God's desire for our lives. That said, there's this also feeling of, iron sharpens iron, and this desire to form, groups and form brotherhood, and that's a positive thing. But again, understanding and recognizing is, are we forming brotherhood with those who have a desire to serve God, or are we forming a brotherhood with those who have other ideas in mind? And we remember that if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. So in order to have brotherhood, true brotherhood, we just follow Christ. And all who follow Christ will be brothers indeed. Hebrews 2:11 tells us that he that sanctifies and they who are sanctified are all of one. And He's not to be ashamed to call them brethren. So if we are sanctified through Christ, desiring to surrender ourselves to Him, we will have the brotherhood that we seek. And we can have this inclusivity. We can have everything that a secret society of the world could give us. In fact, more, because we would have true alliance and true allegiance to our Creator. So again, just a reminder that we are called to stand apart from this world, and we have to be careful on which alliances that we're making. Ephesians 5:11 says, "And have no fellowship with them, with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them." Or what Walter Veith says, which I like, is rather expose them. And that leads us into the next section, which is on secret societies. So in the previous module, we discussed really the psychological desire to connect with others. And in this module, let's cover various secret societies. Now, the first question is, what comes to mind when you hear secret society, right? And many people immediately think of the Illuminati. And they're looking to a secret society that's controlling the world and all this other stuff. Now, I cover this in the course Credibility Traps, but I also cover a bit in the course on theism. And I cover this organization briefly because it did exist. And, the thing is that there's more public societies that we should be focused on. Okay, so that said, let's cover it real briefly because this is the one everyone talks about. So if we go back to the overthrow of the Catholic oppression in 1798, the movement, which was called the Age of Enlightenment, right, was a movement which was similar to teenagers who were raised under strict rule going to college, and then they swung from one extreme to the other, right? That's kind of the if we're looking at the French Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, it's sort of the metaphor you could use. And so this movement brought about atheism and a variety of other 19th century movements, including liberalism, communism, neoclassicism. They all trace back to this period. But the question is, what was behind this movement, this Age of Enlightenment movement? And we find that one group, the Illuminati, was a secret society which came out of, or even some say would helped, the Enlightenment era. So let's look at the man who started the Illuminati. As according to National Geographic, we find out that Weishaupt initially thought of joining a Freemasonry lodge, but disillusioned with many of the Freemasonry ideas, he became absorbed in books and other essentially themes of the sages of Memphis and the Kabbalah, and decided to found a new secret society of his own. And it was reported later that the initiatives that had to present a detailed report on the titles and the books that he owned, identity of his enemies, the weak points of his character, all this kind of came with this. Many important people, such as politicians, doctors, lawyers, judges, all belonged to the society. But it's interesting to note that the Freemasonry and Jesuit order existed during this time. Now, let me be super clear. There's a fine line between truth and error, and there's a place for understanding history and the conspiracies that have historically documented conspiracies and what can be proven, and then not kind of go across into theories that can't be proven. So again, this is what I cover a lot deeper in the course Credibility Traps. If you haven't already taken this one, it's really more important than any of the other courses in the Awakening series to help you understand, as you're gaining light, not to fall prey to a credibility landmine. And because I do believe that there are traps set that surround the truth. And if a deceiver can get us to believe something that is either unprovable or just demonstrably false, we'll lose our credibility and will not be able to caution others along the way. So I caution us again, be careful where you step and where not to step. Take a step back, stop trying to look behind some imaginary curtain and just look at who's on the stage in front of us. And what this means is, I don't think there's any value personally in going down the Illuminati track, for the reason that yes, it was a secret society. It had a large impact in the world at the time, but what we can kind of take from it is that it dissolved. Other things have replaced it. And yet, while we're still looking behind the curtain to find this secret society that probably does not exist anymore, what we lose fact of is the secret societies that are right there in public sight. And that's what this course is about, public secrets. So we've already kind of covered a little bit about the fraternities, but what are some other gateways to secret societies? And what are some examples that we can look to see how children are conditioned along the way? So from my perspective, I see the Demolays and the Scouts as essentially indoctrination schools and to clubs and societies, right? Then fraternities will lead then into university secret societies, which is historically seen as recruitment centers for secret societies, as well as CIA and other secretive organizations. Now, to be clear, I'm not calling all organizations like Scouts inherently evil. I think there's a lot to learn about discipline, and during my time in the military, I learned a lot about, kind of what it means to, essentially be a scout, right? Or what it means, and this has kind of served me through my career. But the important thing to understand, and what I am saying, is beware of what you're being fed. Because that same spoon, right, that it has vegetables can also have poison. And so understand that the greatest deceptions are not all-out falsehoods. The greatest deceptions are a slight deviation of truth that will lead down a path. And so, again, beware as you learn more information not to stumble down a path and not to allow yourself to be spoon-fed or spoon-fed your children things with deceptive undertones. So, again, I mentioned the Demolays earlier, but this was founded by the Knights Templar, right? And they teach structure, but they also teach their own philosophies. And so looking into, who founded the Demolay International, it all comes back to the Knights Templar. So we're going to cover that in a little bit. But just to understand that there's other organizations, a more mainstream organization would be the Boy Scouts, which again, I think it's incredibly healthy to teach children discipline, practical skills, but what this does, and the Scouts do, is it conditions their mind for a lodge framework and essentially gamifies this need for leveling up and badges, right? And this can only be satisfied later in life by continuing through other similar organizations, whether it be through the corporate rat race and promotions, or whether it be through a fraternity and different levels or secret societies and leveling up in them. Now, this is not just my own opinion. We actually can find how, just for the record, that the Boy Scouts were founded by Lord Baden-Powell, who was inspired by Rudyard Kipling's Masonic teachings. This is why Scout lodges are very similar to Masonic lodges. Now, there are some differences, but there's a lot of similarities. And it's interesting how the oath has granted, it's a different hand sign, but it kind of follows the same concept. We keep seeing these, conditioning these hand signs using oaths. Then if you are, too old for the Demolays or the Boy Scouts, then there's fraternities. And the more initiated understand the secret university societies. Some examples of this would be the Sphinx Society in Dartmouth, which meets inside of a replica of the Egyptian tomb. The Society of Seven, Ivy Club, Berlin Club, Yale's Wolf's Head Club, Skull and Key, and Skull and Bones. These are just to name a few. There's a lot more of these. I'm not going to dive in deeper in these, but understand that these are, have had, very prominent members that belong to them. So an example of this would be Skull and Bones. These are not light-hearted organizations. The Skull and Bones is also known as the Brotherhood of Death, and it's an extension of a German organization known for its powerful alumni, and its rituals have been described as Masonically inspired. Also, the number 322. Interestingly enough, this is said to come from Genesis 3:22, which says, "God beheld, and the man has become one of us to know good and evil." So raising man to a level of deity. Now, this is going to come about this theme of man becoming God is a theme that you'll find through almost all secret societies at the higher level. The takeaway is ultimately fraternities and university secret societies are just training grounds to recruit people who value inclusion more than independent thought and individual morals. And so we want to guard ourselves from, the getting pulled into a secret society based, or any type of cult really, based on this desire to fit in. So what about Freemasonry? And the question is it even a secret society? Because it's really public. So the dictionary defines Freemason as an international group of people who have banded together to help each other hold elaborate secrets, to help each other and hold elaborate secret ceremonies. So, the definition is that there's a secret aspect to this and secret ceremonies. But if you go to the website, it actually kind of looks really compelling, right? Like for me, like Freemasonry, is positioned as those, who should be, men, right? That's what it says here. More than just men. The world needs Masons. I mean, this to me is incredibly compelling because I feel like, society is not creating enough men, and secret societies are providing some of that foundation that the brotherhood of Christ is not providing as it should. So, being totally honest, this is very attractive to me. Brotherly love, right? Truth, right? And we read here that there's 3 degrees of Masonry. So there's a gamification element, right? Give me a sense of accomplishment and validation as I would level up. We read here built-in mentorship. This is fantastic. Sense of belonging, right? At the surface, it's like, okay, where do I sign up? Okay, but you look into it, and it says here that that there's 3 levels, and I just need to level up, and I can take part in fraternal activities, whatever that means. And super straightforward. Again, we look here, we see that there are 3 degrees: the apprentice, craft, and then I could become the very top, a master mason. Now, it even says that all 3 ceremonies you won't get harassed. So, kid gloves, and even George Washington and Harry Truman were part of this. Okay, so it doesn't seem like it's, a huge secret society. It seems pretty straightforward. There's just 3 degrees, and you just kind of level up through those, pretty straightforward. The thing is that there's not just 3 degrees. And so if you start actually clicking through the website, you click right there on Masonic organizations. And it's, it has all these logos like Scottish Rite, Royal Arch, Shriners, and there's like a lot of these, right? So the question is like, wait, what, right? So is this a part of Freemasonry? So there's not just 3 degrees, like, and what are just symbolic degrees, right? And so it's kind of interesting. You kind of are looking through, and we see that there's, this other levels, right? So there's the symbolic degrees, right? There's the capitular degrees, the cryptic degrees, and the chivalric orders. So cryptic means obscure and mystic. Then the orders of the Knights Templar. This is the chivalric degrees. Chivalry was a medieval system, so has its own religious and moral social code. And so if we count up these first degrees, they're actually, ultimately, if we go through all these, they're actually 13. So there are 13 degrees. There's 13 steps on this Masonic ladder. Now, this is a number that's going to keep coming up. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of 13s in the founding of our country. 13 colonies. We'll get into that later, into seeing all the stripes. All these things have this number of 13. And it has secret handshakes. So I remember when I started my first corporate job, the director of IT shook my hand, and it was really unusual how he shook my hand, and it puzzled me for a while. And then I figured out that I found out later that he was an active Freemason. And so he was just trying to figure out if I was a Freemason or not right off the bat there with his handshake. Now, this is the one that was maybe the one I was most curious about. And I wanted to look more into this, this 32 Freemasons. And so I wanted to get a sense on what this was about. And so I went to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry website. Again, this is just on their website, so it's not secret. Click on the history section, and from their own website, they say that they started meeting in a bar called Devil Temple Bar in London. So the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry started in the Devil's Temple in London. And again, this is like, right there on their website. And the iconography they're using is a pope, or it could be a bishop with the hat there. And clearly, what is the devil? So it seems that this whole organization is a union between the pope and the devil. Now, as I get a lot more into Scottish Rite and the 32 degrees, there's actually 33, which is the Supreme Council. So Freemasonry may only say they have 3 degrees, but overall as an organization, they have 33 degrees. And the question is there any symbolism to 33? right? The deceiver took a third of the angels in heaven. 1/3 is 33%. There's a pattern here. The first generation of kids, Cain, killed Abel. And if we do the math, with Seth involved, 1/3 rebelled. We see the same thing after after the flood. Had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, Japheth. Ham disrespected his father and was cursed by God. 1 rebelled. 1/3 is always rebelling, it seems. So clearly there's a complex organization with different levels, with some dark connections. But what I recommend, again, if you haven't taken the Credibility Traps course, take that first, because this is a rabbit hole that you can start going down, but we have to stick with what we can prove. Let's not go and veer off into crazy tangents. Let's just stick with what's public. But understanding that what's public often has a double meaning. This is called esoteric. So to better understand the reasoning behind secret societies, we need to understand their duality in message. Now, as always, I recommend learning from Walter Veith on this topic. He really is an expert, in this field. But when we start looking at what does esoteric mean, it's intended for or unlikely to be understood by only a small number of people with a specialized knowledge or interest. So the idea is there's information given publicly to outsiders, and then there's information which is only understood from within by the initiated. This is found in Freemasonry, Catholicism, and many other fronts for occultism. But behind every symbol, there is a much darker symbol. We read here in Our Phallic Heritage by Charles Berger, "Thus symbols came to have 2 meanings, the esoteric and the exoteric. The esoteric meaning was the true or original meaning, understood by only a few and closely guarded by them. The exoteric meaning was the invented, or modified explanation intended for the many. The secret mysteries, which are often mentioned in connection with many ancient religions and were closely guarded by the initiate, concerned esoteric meanings in the religions of previous times." We read from Albert Pike in Morals and Dogma, "The blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols displayed there are to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he should understand them, but it is intended that he should imagine he understands them. Their true explanation is reserved for the adepts, the princes of Masonry, the whole body of the royal and are hidden so carefully throughout times." So what we understand here is that these are intentionally placed as both as a way to mislead. So the goal is to disguise truth as lies and to take a lie and present it as truth. Ultimately, what's happening is that there's an inversion of reality. Light is dark. Dark is light. Right? How much of you have looked, how many of you kind of looked through this glass sphere and see it's inverted, right? This is the foundation of occultism. By the way, this really is a thing. If you look through the glass sphere, it actually is inverted. But it's interesting that this glass orb is ultimately utilized, right? This crystal ball is, looking into an inverted world, which Satan has tried to create through misinformation and lies, right? In reality, Jesus is the only Son of God, and Lucifer is an angel who desired to be more than he was. However, in occultism, Lucifer is the first Son of God and who was overthrown by Jesus. So Lucifer sees himself as the true luminary. All of this is an attempt to remove Jesus as our sole Savior of man and for Lucifer to live out his remaining moments as ruler on earth. To understand this clearly, we must understand the history of religion. I cover this in my course on theism, so I recommend that track to understand this better. But really to kind of go down this path, it started with this distrust. So after the flood, through the lineage of Ham, right, the 1/3 that rebelled, through the lineage of Ham came Nimrod. And Nimrod did not believe the Bible promise that there would never be a flood again. And so he said, I'm going to create a tower that will extend in the clouds so that God, if God tries to send another flood, we will be untouchable. And that was really the whole idea of creating the Tower of Babel. So we understand that, in regards to Masonry, that Babel, of course, represents a Masonic enterprise. And this comes from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. And then it is well known that the Tower of Babel was one of the most ancient traditions of Masonry, the arcane schools. So what we find out here is that all Freemasonry has its root in rebellion and distrust in God. God had other plans and confused their language, and Genesis 11 tells us that they scattered across the face of the earth. And so the building that they were building, right, the Tower of Babel, ultimately sat, incomplete. And it was later eroded away, but what we understand that in 1999, there appears to be a replica made of the Tower of Babel. And it was used as a design for the European Parliament building in Strasbourg. So, it sure looks like it to me. Again, not something you can prove, but wow, it really sure looks like it. The European Parliament is literally an unfinished Tower of Babel. Anyways, so Nimrod dies, but is immortalized, and his death, also known as Ninus, Osiris, Baal, the list goes on. He's immortalized as these gods. It's because Nimrod's wife, Semiramis, said that the sun, that Nimrod went to the sun, and that Nimrod is the sun god, that's the origin of sun worship, and that the rays of the sun, so that the phallic rays of Nimrod, came and impregnated her, and she then formed a child, even after Nimrod had been dead. So she becomes the Egyptian Isis, Tammuz becomes Horus, and the immortalized Nimrod becomes Osiris. And this is where we see the foundation of sun worship. Now, every civilization since has a different version of the same people. So, in short, Nimrod and his wife Semiramis and her bastard child Tammuz are all the foundation of just about all pagan religions. They have different names, different languages, same person, same name or title. So we see Egypt, Ra, Isis, Osiris. We see Rome, Jupiter, Venus, Attis. Right? We see India, Vishnu, Kali, Krishna. Right? We see how it's all the same individuals over different localizations. This idea that had formed a pagan trinity is the basis of a father, mother, and son. And this, of course, is Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Now, understanding that the idea of the Trinity is actually formed the word Trinity is pagan, but the idea of a three-part, a Godhead comprising of three personalities is found in the Bible. It's called Godhead. But anytime you introduce a female, right, then we know that it's a pagan version. So they are cleverly designed, as God, Jesus, and Mary. And this is paganism. Any religion that's based on a father, a son, and a mother trilogy dates back to Nimrod. And again, I go through this deeper into understanding the trilogy in the course on Bible Truth. Big picture is that, again, we're seeing that the Catholic Church has a take on Christianity, which is a veneer, which is it's the a front, right, for outsiders. But know that this is to those who are on the initiated, understand who they're actually worshiping. So on the outside, right, you go into Catholic Church, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, but they're actually elevated Mary up instead. And to the initiated, this is ultimately worshiping Lucifer through Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Now, we've got to know our history. And if we don't understand history, we take things at face value and we'll be deceived. And so with this, I think the earliest or the easiest way to understand this is to view it like a timeline. So we can trace two main religions branches. There was the origin of monotheism, and this is the human lineage starting with Adam in the Garden of Eden, and forward to his son Abel, who was killed by his other son Cain. And this started the lineage of rebellion against the one true God. The monotheistic lineage continued through Noah at the flood, which killed off the rebellion, but then restarted again. And so after the flood, Noah and his 3 sons repopulated the earth. One of Noah's sons, Ham, who rebelled, then went on to have sons including Cush, Seba, Rama, and Cush's grandson Nimrod. So where these become kind of, this lineage, where it becomes interesting, is that this forms Hinduism. Cush forms Hinduism and becomes Cush with a K, right? Seba becomes Shiva. Rama, right? Ham becomes Brahma. Noah is called Matsuya. And then from Nimrod, we have pagan mystery religion, and this is Baal to some, Ra to others. And so these become the 2 main forks of paganism, starting with Hinduism and with pagan mythology. Hinduism eventually becomes Buddhism. You get into Jainism first, because Buddhism is a clone of Jainism, but that's contemporary, doesn't matter. Okay, pagan mythology goes through the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Greek, and eventually pagan Rome. And again, this is kind of a work in progress. I just kind of threw some pieces together. There's a lot more to it that won't even fit on the screen. But I need a far bigger canvas to fit this all in. But the short of it is, after the flood, there were those who worshiped God and those who began to turn their backs on God and worship made-up gods, carvings, and idols. This mythology continued down through Roman mythology, and paganism, right, is what it would be considered. Under Roman, Diocletian, and Nero, they sought to exterminate monotheism, but it survived through restorationist groups like the Waldensians and others. The Roman Catholic Church tried to aggressively exterminate them. Islam was founded with some influence from Judaism and then pagan flavor of Christianity in the Roman Catholic Church. Again, Buddhism spawns spiritualism, Kabbalism, Islam, Gnosticism. All these are spawned from this. So we can kind of start seeing how other lines all formed from this core rebellion. Just to recap, we have a pagan mysticism which spawns from the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a way to pervert Christianity. The Catholics then created the Jesuits and the Knights Templar, which spawned Rosicrucians, and Freemasonry, which spawned Marxism. The international banking elite came from this line, the World Council of Churches, and various other secret political societies. The book, En Route to Global Occupation, in which a high-ranking government liaison, Gary Kaw, warns against that national sovereignty will soon be a thing in the past, speaking that political forces around the world are now cooperating in unprecedented fashion to achieve their goal of uniting the people of this planet under a new world order. Now, there's been a lot of conspiracy talk about new world orders and all these kind of things, but this is, if you just look in the news, just do a search under, the World Economic Forum as an example, they make it very, very clear. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy. But it's not even hidden. It's a public secret, right? Everybody knows if you just look into it. They're looking to create a standardization. So let's talk about the next piece, which is all of the symbols and symbology that we see. So let's discuss some hidden symbols which have these second or esoteric meanings. The first are found in Masonic architecture. Now, we can't forget that Masons played a major role in the foundation of the United States. History is very clear that our first president, right, George Washington, was a master Mason. Turns out that most, or at least many, of the U.S. presidents were known public Freemasons. And one may assume that others were not so public about it. So Freemasonry and the U.S. history are quite associated. In Washington, D.C., we feature a number of Masonic signs today. In fact, most of the city was designed by Masons. One major landmark is the House of the Temple. Now, we talked about this earlier. This houses the 33rd degree. The House of the Temple is a Masonic temple in Washington, D.C. that serves as the headquarters for Freemasonry, or the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. It's also the home of the Supreme Council, the 33 degree, as well as other jurisdictions in the Southern Jurisdiction Councils. In 1944, the remains of Albert Pike, who was a Confederate general and former Sovereign Grand Commander of Freemasonry, was moved from Oak Hill Cemetery and placed in the House of the Temple. Albert Pike was the author of the 1871 book called Morals and Dogma, which is kind of like the Freemasonry Bible. What we see here is that the Supreme Council of the House of the Temple consisted of 33 members who are 33 degree Masons of satanic wisdom. And the temple has 33 columns and is 33 feet high. In fact, Washington, D.C. is designed around ancient mathematics infused with spiritual meanings. One interesting integration was how the jewel of the past master is integrated with the design of the city. So here we have this jewel that they wear, and this is the jewel of the past master. Inside of it has a compass and a square, and it's encapsulating the sun god. Active Mason and Director of Masonic Memorial, Mark Tabbert, confirms that the Masonic symbols, or that Masons designed and built Washington, D.C., and that the symbols can be placed, can be found through all the city. But he also dismisses that it was, that aligns with any, the street plan aligns with that. So he kind of contradicts himself there. But what can we see with our own eyes? So let's look at this map of Washington, D.C. We see a few monuments pop out, right? The White House, U.S. Capitol, Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, and the Washington Monument. Interesting how these form lines, which is very similar to the jewel we saw earlier. And in the center of the jewel, where the sun is represented, we find the Washington Monument. And it's a congressional record that the Masons of the United States had a major role in both the funding and building of Washington Monument, and it was laid on July 4th, 1848 by Freemasons. It's all public record. Freemasons, James Hobart designed the White House, and his apprentice Robert Mills created the Egyptian-styled obelisk, which we now call the Washington Monument. We read here from history that on June 4, 1848, the Grand Master of the Masons and D.C. led the cornerstone laying ceremony in the presence of President Polk. So even the president was part of this, also Freemason ceremony. By 1855, the society had 92 commemorative stones along different sizes and composition, and among them were 22 from Masonic lodges, 14 from lodges actually, and 8 from individual lodges. So this is literally built on Masonic stones. Today, there are more than 20 complete zodiacs in Washington, D.C., each one pointing to an extraordinary mystery, as the author of this book, David Alverson, speaks to. He has studied these astrological devices for 10 years and now reveals that they have been placed in such an abundance in the center of the nation's capital and that they're interconnected. So, again, the idea is that astrology plays an important role in Masonic rites, and that there's so many symbols integrated all throughout. We read in the Moon and the Venus here. We read here how the cornerstones of Washington Monument obelisk were laid just as the sun passed over Sirius. So again, even it was exactly at 10:59 that the cornerstone was placed. Why would you not do it at 11? Why would you do it at 10:59? Because it had to happen corresponding to the patterns in the skies. If we look at the Washington Monument, the emblem is of a sun, right? In the jewel, right? We see that as an obelisk. The shape has an origin. When we just type in obelisk, it says the definition: this shape has origins with ancient Egyptians who used obelisks, or tekhenus, to represent and celebrate, I should say, the sun god Ra, who was contained within the obelisk. So it represented the sun god. It was the phallic symbol of the sun god. And we find out that these are literally all over the world. This is the craziest thing, is that it's not just one place. These are everywhere. Okay, the first one well, not the first one, but as we understand it, but one of the oldest ones that we know of is in Heliopolis, which is the oldest city in ancient Egypt, and it's the essentially the only surviving obelisk, which is located at the Temple of Ra-Atum. And this is the oldest surviving obelisk in the world. Also note that two similar obelisks were moved to London and to New York. So the Bible is very clear that we're not to make any carved image or of standing stone, right? Standing image of stone. This is literally what the Bible is referring to, are these obelisks, symbols of pagan worship, sun worship. In Deuteronomy, we read that God instructed his people to break down these pillars and destroy the places where people served pagan gods. Here's one of the most notable obelisks they'll add to the list, and this is one is directly in front of the Vatican. Okay, nope, wrong slide. This one is actually in front of the Capitol. There's the Vatican, but you couldn't really tell the difference, could you? They actually look pretty much the same. So this is the United States, and that actually is the Vatican. I mixed up my slides as a joke. So they are intentionally have major similarities. The Vatican, which is the home of the Roman Catholic movement, which is the home of Lucifer to a large degree, ultimately our nation, the United States nation, mimics this. And there's even more similarities between the two. So we can look at the pattern, right? So here's the square out in front of the Vatican. And we can kind of see, if we look from a top-down view, the sun worship monument, right? We see an intersecting pattern of the two circles in the courtyard. The same thing we'll see if we look at the United States. It's the same ring pattern is found. So the pattern is actually found in a lot of places, and it has a name. It's called vesica piscis, which is an overlapping area that makes this interesting shape of an eye. Now, this is intentional, and we find its origins with sun worship, specifically, symbolizing the eye of Ra. Now remember, what we learned, the obelisk symbolizes the sun god Ra, okay? And at the center is this all-seeing eye. So the eye of Ra is the masculine part of the eye of Horus. Horus has one eye of Ra, we understand is coming from his father Nimrod, or Ra, and the other eye, Thoth, which is the feminine side, which I would conclude comes from his mother Isis, or Hathor, or Queen Semiramis. And there's a lot more of this we can come back to, but it's just interesting that these are called together the eyes of Horus, and Horus being Tammuz. And so this concept of getting one eye from the father, one eye from the mother, the eye of Ra, the eye of Thoth, coming together, the eyes of Horus. And let's discuss more of this shape formed by the overlap of these two circles. So if we look into this, it's the intersection of two discs, literally means the bladder of a fish. So vesica piscis literally means bladder of a fish. Now, why is that interesting? Because if you've seen this symbol before, does it look familiar? Right? Maybe you've seen this on like the back of cars and things like this. It has Jesus a lot of times inside of it. This 1970s Jesus fish symbol was adopted as a modern symbol of Christianity and is even used today to indicate someone is a Christian. Ironically, it's a companion symbol to the sun god Ra. And Satan uses this to mock that he has his people have not studied history. So to the uninitiated, we see it as a Catholic symbol for Christianity, but for the initiated, they understand it as a symbol of the pagan god Ra and occultism. And we see this same exact pattern all throughout Catholic imagery. In fact, this same exact fish shape is in a lot of different other pagan artworks. Here we see it's a literal depiction of Jesus, and he's contained inside of the same shape. This shape is about fertility, right? It's linked to the fish god Dagon, the god of fertility, whose priests wore, these hats with the mouths of a fish. And we can see, based on carvings in the walls and other places, that ultimately Dagon was worshipped in ancient Syria and was regarded as the father of the gods. So even the shape of the Pope's hat has the shape of the fish. So his little mitre hat there has that open mouth of the fish, and the front part of it looks like a fish as well. It's an exact match to the priests of the Philistine god Dagon, and who we know from the Bible was an enemy of Israel and God's people. So, not much has changed. I go far more in detail on this topic in the track called Final Warning. Recommend that course if you want to dive deeper in this topic. But to kind of look for more instances, we see this fertility symbol throughout all Catholic imagery. But this time, it's not a depiction of Jesus rebranding the Alpha and the Omega. Now we're seeing this X and P. And we see the same X and P is in the Pope's cross. So we see the fish head again here in the Pope's mitre, his hat. And this symbol of the P and the X is called the Chi Rho. So we are told that the first use of the Chi Rho was used in the shields of Constantine's warriors after he saw a symbol, this exact symbol, in the sky, and then went on to win a critical battle. And that's why we are told that he adopted Christianity. What we understand is that it wasn't some miracle that presented to him that he adopted Christianity, but he adopted Christianity as a way to stop Christianity. Because if he could merge, he understood what Balaam did in the Bible, and if he could merge Christianity with paganism, then he could then eliminate Christianity, which he's done pretty well today. In Morals and Dogma, page 292, we see that the symbol is referenced as the staff of Orius, and his monogram was adopted by the Christians as a sign. We constantly see the Tau and the Resh united, and these two letters in the Old Samaritan are found in Arius, and the staff of Arius in his monogram, and it was adopted by Christians as a sign. There's a number of variations to this, one with the cross inside, one with a circle and a dot, and we find that the circle and dot has a lot of symbolism of its own. The 33-degree Masonry, Albert Mackey states in a Manual of the Lodge, says that the point within the circle is important in Freemasonry in relating to old sun worship, and that it represents the worship of the phallus. So we see the point here in the circle that's under the Chi Rho is this, well, it looks like a target symbol. I mean, check out the course on, I don't have it listed here, but check out the course on cults and brands. All these symbology are there. It's all in corporate America. Anyway, that's not the point. The point simply is we'll see that sometimes these are joined together. Sometimes it's below, sometimes it's joined together. But ultimately we understand that sometimes it's just on its own. All this refers to the phallic worship of the sun god Ra and his phallus. So just to reset a bit, we've been looking at the obelisk and learning that it symbolizes the sun god Ra, and it is not coincidental that it looks like a phallus like it does. It's because it's there to represent fertility. The dot inside the circle is actually a symbol for the worship of sex, like we just talked about. This is their words, not mine. And we can read how this point within a circle is the worship of the phallus. This is connected to the Eye of Ra. This is found in Freemasonry, Catholicism, many other fronts for occultism. But behind every symbol is a much darker symbol. According to the National Park Service, when measured in 1884, this monument to Ra, which we identify as the national monument to the United States, this monument to Ra is 169 meters or 555 feet tall. If you just do a Google search, how tall is the Washington Monument height in inches, you identify that it actually comes out to 6,660 inches. Interesting, the 666, and we turn to Revelation 13, we read, "Here is wisdom, let him that have understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666." Again, this is covered deeper in the course Final Warning, but it's actually interesting that even that it's actually really organized around these dimensions. The base is 660 inches at the bottom, 420 inches at the top. Interesting symbology there. The shape of the obelisk is very interesting, how it's one piece at the bottom, and then later there's a capstone, and this has a little pyramid on top of that. So it's reminiscent of the unfinished pyramid. The base of the obelisk is the unfinished pyramid. Okay? It's the unfinished Tower of Babel, created by Nimrod until God disrupted it. And it was to be a pillar stretching into the heavens. In 1782, Samuel Adams appointed the first design artist, this guy William Barton of Philadelphia, to bring a proposal for the national seal. And for the reverse, of the seal, Barton suggested a 13-layered pyramid underneath the Eye of Providence, the Eye of Ra. We've learned from Bible symbolism that 13 is the number of rebellion. 13 layers, 13 equals rebellion, and this ultimately did get integrated in. We see the symbol is on the back of the US dollar now, with the all-seeing Eye of Ra on the top of the unfinished pyramid, representing the Tower of Babel. It's now, however, finished, right? It has a capstone on top of it, and this capstone is incredibly important to the idea that they had finished the Tower of Babel. And even the capstone, we find, has a capstone. On December 6, 1884, the capstone of aluminum was placed on top of the otherwise stone monument. So even the capstone has a little mini capstone on top of that. And what's interesting is the material used. Aluminum is the 13th element in the periodic table. Again, 13. And on this little capstone was written inscriptions. On 3 sides was the builder's names, and then on the 4th side there, the phrase in Latin, Laus Dei, or praise be to God, on the east side. Now, it's interesting that east points to the rising sun. Also, the way it's positioned, it points to the U.S. Capitol. The other 3 sides point to the monuments of Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and the sitting president of the United States. So it's kind of interesting how there's still 3 names associated to this, pointing to the east then. Interesting, in Ezekiel 8:15, we read that Ezekiel was shown greater abominations of these 25 men with their backs to God and worshiping the sun to the east. So the capstone text, praise be to God, that points to the east, is talking about praising the rising sun. So what God called an abomination in Ezekiel. So sun worship, or the worship to the sun god Ra, right? There's a close symbol to the Ankh, which is this Egyptian hieroglyphic symbol to represent the word for life. We also see how it's found in the hand of Horus and in Ra. Here we find the same symbol in the tomb in Luxor, Egypt, as well as the Louvre Museum in Paris, France, painted in limestone around 1275, depicting the god Horus offering the life to King Ramses II. Now, this symbol is going to pop up a lot more. The evolution of this symbol becomes the cross. We read that the clothes of the priests of Horus were covered in these little crosses. Here, the priest of Horus wears the cross, and these are modern-day priests of Horus, wearing the same exact cross as the older priests of Horus wore. This cross is a Christianized version of the cross of Horus. You may also recognize the symbol from the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar, known as the Order of Solomon's Temple, or simply the Templars, was a Catholic military order and one of the most wealthiest and popular of the military orders of the time. They were founded in 1119, and headquarters and the Mount of Jerusalem had existed for nearly 2 centuries during the Middle Ages. Officially endorsed by the Roman Catholic Church, these Knight Templars are distinctive in their white mantles. Okay, so the Knights Templar are endorsed by the Catholic Church. It's their military order. Now, if you want to come full circle, Baphomet is the deity which, with the hand symbols, and this is who the Knights Templar worship. So how is it that the Knights Templar worship Lucifer, and yet they are the official order of the Catholic Church? Also interesting, the symbology here. He has the head of Azazel, the scapegoat, which the sins are placed on and sent in the wilderness, right? More in the Plan of Redemption course. And understand that this scapegoat is the devil. And even notice the placement of his hands. This placement is the same hand sign that the Pope makes. It's more than just a coincidence. This is very intentional, the sign that they give. All the popes give the same exact sign. And their story is that it was a benediction sign that came from St. Peter, who had nerve damage. But this is just silly when you think that why would a church so purposely use a sign from a defect of a man in religious service? First off, there is no, there's no historic, understanding that this was even a thing that St. Peter did. First off, Peter. Second, even if it was, why would you magnify it? It's just an occult sign. It's just basic logic, right? So again, the devil's priests are hidden in plain sight. Let's keep learning about the Knights Templar. So they were a prominent Christian finance and non-combatant member of order. It made up about 90% of their members, managed large economic infrastructure, and were an early form of banking, building a network of 1,000 commanderies and fortifications across Europe and the Holy Land. So they were the first banks. The worshippers of Lucifer created the first banks. And they were the financial order, the non-combatant military arm of the Catholic Church. Now, the downfall of the Knights Templar in France was due to the struggles with then King France Philip IV, who was deeply in debt to Knight Templars and saw them a threat to his power. So, bottom line, the Knights Templars were all arrested in 1307 because the king was worried that they were going to take his throne because they owed him so much money. He owed them so much money. And so the thing is that they got too powerful, and the king didn't like their level of power. And on Friday the 13th in 1307, mass arrested all the Templars. Okay. Now this is interesting because this is why Friday the 13th is a thing, because they think that Friday the 13th is unlucky because it was the day that the Knights Templars were all killed. So now, fast forward a little bit, cue the Protestant Reformation 200 years later, and the Catholic Church needs to have that army again because they need to combat the Protestant Reformation. And if one understands the Protestant Reformation, they'll understand it was a rejection of pagan beliefs. But this is mostly forgotten by Protestant leaders who are pulled back in the arms of the papacy and keep many of the papal dogmas. Shortly after this, the Protestant Reformation, Pope Paul II authorized the formation of the Society of the Jesuits, founded by Ignatius Loyola. Okay, so this is now a new order of the Catholic Church, and it was there to stop the Protestant movement. Right? So at this time, the order of the Jesuits were created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, powerful, and all champions of the popery. Right? And what we read here is that, under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were often concealed. The Jesuits repeatedly spread themselves all over Europe. Wherever they went, there followed the revile of popery. So, as they spread, right, we find here, let's look into the doctrine of the Jesuits. And here's this whole book on this. And if we go into it and read it, it says, the Jesuits are instructed to be a spy even to their own brethren, and to believe and trust no one. Again, this is coming from their doctrine. We also identify that the famous Jesuit oath, which is known for its extreme nature, right, opposes anyone and anything other than the Pope, and that they're to be kept secret and private, all her agents, right? This whole thing, I declare, everyone who opposes the Pope to be their enemies. And more than just being their enemies, in a passive sense, they say that they are to wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against Protestants and liberals, and then describes a way that they'll torture and kill anyone who opposes the papacy. So clearly an organization that understands the meaning of love your neighbor. No, just kidding. Okay, the point is, their role is to insidiously plan seeds of jealousy and hatred between communities, to incite them into deeds of blood, to create revolutions, to create wars, and essentially anywhere that there's any country that's independent and prosperous, they are there to tear it down, to take sides with both the combatants and act secretly with your brother as a Jesuit who may be engaged on the other side, but oppose them openly, in which you may be connected. So what we see is this clear understanding that this is an organization that's just there to create chaos, right? The idea of working both sides and causing conflict comes from the Hegelian dialectic. They play both sides, they create tension, so that the resolution of the tension results in movement, ultimately to the side's intended direction. So here's an idea, right? There's an agenda, then there's a thesis, then there's an antithesis, and the resolution provides the synthesis. And then they start again. It's like political cycles. The Jesuits are a master of this manipulation, which creates mass destruction and chaos in their wake. And the whole time, they're moving through this chaos, they're moving closer and closer to their desired state. We find here that he finds freedom only in obedience to the state. And this is America's secret establishment. The Hegelian system, conflict is essential, it says. The idea is to create friction and chaos between the right and the left, between the white and black, until the pain and separation exceeds the pain of unity. And then it's all brought under one control. So hurtful was a Jesuit order found that up until 1860 it expelled no fewer than 70 times from the countries which had suffered from its machinations. We find here that if ever this is John Adams, by the way, if ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth, it was the Society of the Loyolas. And that many organized Jesuits have been justly described as treacherous, traitorous, working, seducing many service in the Roman pontiff away from national allegiance. A quote from one Roman Catholic, "The Pope by divine right hath spiritual temporal power as supreme king of the world." So just as a recap, after Catholicism lost the Knights Templar, Jesuits were formed to battle Protestantism. Satan just can't stand existence of Jesus, and while he can't destroy him, he'll just try and destroy his image here. The Bible tells us that above the cross was written, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But in pagan Catholicism, you always see this INRI. So you ask, what is that? And it's explained as, well, it's Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But it's meant actually as Ustum Nectar Regis Imposius, which essentially translates, using their words, not mine, according to the Jesuit oath, it translates to, it is just to exterminate or annihilate impious or heretical kings or rulers. So the sign above Jesus says, it is just to exterminate heretical kings. And this is what they feel about Jesus. The goal of the Jesuits is to destroy Christ and destroy Protestantism. They do not acknowledge any other church other than their own. The Vatican has decreed that the Catholic Church is the mother of all churches and banned the term sister churches to describe their other denominations. In two new documents that could be harmful, that could harm Vatican efforts towards unity. So this was released. The Jesuits, by their very calling, are bound to seek the destruction of Protestantism. And we see here. The current head of the Jesuits is Arturo Soso, which, despite his priestly collar and sly grin, he is a military leader. It was Napoleon who said, "The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious one." And he continued that, and the aim of this organization is power, absolute power, universal power. And this comes from Napoleon, who knew a thing or two about global domination. We read here again, the Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious one. Here's one, Brothers Karamazov. The Jesuits are simply Romish army for the pontiff of Rome, a universal serfdom with the Jesuits as masters. They don't even believe in God. And we read here again, in the book by George Reamer, if ever there's a body of men who internal damnation, we read here, Jesuits in history, how they're behind the papal throne. We read here, the Babington plot, Jesuit intrigue, how seducing many in the service of Roman pontiff away from national allegiance. We've seen some of these quotes already. The great controversy reads, professing to announce the work, but under this blameless exterior, most criminal and deadly purposes are often concealed. The SS, which had been organized by Heinrich Himmler, organizing according to the principles of the Jesuit order. So the rules of service and spiritual exercises prescribed by Loyola were adopted by the SS, by the Nazis. Read here that if a Jesuit priest was actually one that wrote Mein Kampf. That's what Behind the Dictators, Leo Lehrman suggests. Ultimately, we find here that this guy here was a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest, and he's the one that helped write the book. So again, what we see is on the outside is Jesuits. On the initiative, the initiated understand that they are Satan's soldiers. Again, I recommend do Freemasons worship Lucifer, a video by Walter Veith, really great video. So we've discussed the Jesuits. Now let's connect the dots and prove how Freemasons were started and are controlled by the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church. So the Jesuits of Rome have perfected Freemasonry to be their most magnificent and effective tool accomplishing the purpose among the Protestants. And that the Jesuits essentially created Freemasonry as the Protestant arm of the Roman Catholic Church. We read here that, this is from Madame Blavatsky, that the Scottish Rite, Order of the Temple, etc., are all nearly the offspring of the sons of Ignatius Loyola, worked under the instructions from the general of the Jesuits. We read here that the head of the Masons of the world, you discover that the chief of the Society of Jesus are one and the same person. So all the symbology we see here, in a nutshell, the head Mason is also ultimately the head of the Jesuits. And these top ranks are the ones who really rule most of the world. So again, you can think that there's secret societies like Illuminati or whatever you want to say, but it's a lot clearer. It's a lot more public than you'd think. There isn't anyone behind the curtain with a nameless face. The same goes for the Knights of Malta. Now, here's that symbol again. We've seen that symbol before, which we read here representing, so this is a level of Freemasonry, representing the Order of St. John, but we understand this is not St. John after all. Here again, we see them standing with their leader in the Vatican, with the Pope right there in the center. This is an order which is completely run by the Pope, and we read from the National Catholic Reporter, their leader can be disposed and a new leader can be appointed at the will of the Pope. Okay, so the top level of the Freemasons is appointed by the Pope. It's a sub-organization of Freemasonry, is the rebirth of the Knights Templar, and they have taken back their role as leaders of industry, military, and banking. So they brand themselves as St. John International and boast of their membership and their members, including Nelson Mandela, Queen Elizabeth, right? Who, by the way, she was also initiated as a Druid in 1946. You can watch this for yourself if you just Google the videos are there. On the surface, if you look at the website, we see that John and Johannism seem very philanthropic, right? Philanthropic, right? They seem to exist in the service of humanity. They even have hospitals and ambulance organizations, and it's But is it possible that there's a more sinister side? We read here, the Templars, like all other secret orders and associations, have two doctrines: one concealed and reserved from the masters, which was Johannism, St. John; the other public, which was the Roman Catholic. So we find that St. John, to the outsiders, is actually Johannism to the initiative. There's so many sects and cults in this, and again, I continue this more in another course. But what we want to point out here is that the Revelation warns us of a power which is given its authority by the devil. We read a description in Revelation 17:4, and the woman, purple and scarlet color, a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations. If I were to take Revelation 17:4 and do an artist rendering of this, right, I would create a lady in a robe with a cup, right? That's the pagan sun worship, right? Ultimately holding a cross. That's the symbolize the infiltration of Christianity. You know, maybe it's a little bit too on the nose, but interestingly enough, the pagans didn't think so. The Vatican designers who envisioned the same depiction of Revelation 17:4 as I did. And here it is. It's their coin. It's literally the Vatican coin. They're not even hiding the fact that they are the whore of Babylon. Interesting also to note the inscription Fides below it. Where do we find that? Go back to 33-degree Mason Albert Mackey. He states in the Manual of the Lodge that they worship the deity under the name of Fides, or fidelity, sometimes representing by two hands joined and sometimes by two human figures holding each other by the right hands. And this was essentially the altar to Fides under the name Goddess of Oaths. And so they worship oaths. Now, I really want to just drive this home and just reinforce the understanding that there is this duality of light and dark, and how the role of these societies is to confuse and distort. We read here in, again, Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma, Lucifer, the light bearer, strange and mysterious name to be given to spirit of darkness, Lucifer, the son of the morning, is he who bears the light, and with his splendors intolerably fine the feeble, sensational, and selfish souls. Doubt it not. A little bit more on the nose, we read here from the secret doctrine. It is Satan who is the God of our planet and the only God. This is what they actually believe. We read more that the Kabbalists say that the true name of Satan is that of Jehovah placed upside down, for Satan is not a black God, but a negation of the white deity, or the light of truth. God is light, and Satan is the necessary darkness or shadow to set it off, without which pure light would be invisible and incomprehensible. So what we find is that it's a new narrative. How that before it was positioned as Lucifer as darkness, and now he's saying, well, we need to have both light and darkness. Darkness, light can't exist without darkness, is what the claim is. And this is kind of how we have this esoteric understanding that there's the light, which these are Luciferians, and then there's those that believe that Satan is Jesus, and on the other side we have the Satanists, with the witches, the warlocks, and those that communicate with dark magic. So there's light and dark, part of the same, even at this point, same confusing structure. So this quote she mentioned refers to Luciferians, and the dark is referring to the Satanists, both containing this 5-pointed star, one pointing up, one pointing down. In the science of magic, the pentalpha is called the holy and mysterious pentagram. It has a great command over evil spirits. That's what it says. Now, if they look familiar, it's because much of what we've seen is steeped in this darkness. Signs of the occult are all around us. Everywhere we look, there is occultism. Morals and Dogma 839, the occult science of ancient magi is found enveloped in enigmas that seem impenetrable in the rites of the highest masonry. The lowest levels think it's a Christian society. Every Masonic lodge is a temple of religion. It is the teachings are to instruct in religion, which will continue to teach as long as time endures. Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, if Freemasonry were simply a Christian institution, the Jews and the Muslim, the Brahminian and the Buddhist could not conscientiously partake of its illumination. In Morals and Dogma, again, rejecting all the wild and useless speculations, the Kabbalah, the Gnostics, the schools, and the religion and philosophy of Masonry. Can't get much clearer than that. The true Mason is not creed-bound. He realizes the divine illumination of his lodge that a Mason, his religion must be universal. So at the early levels, you can be any religion you want. But as you start to level up, you find that there's actually only one religion, there's only one book that you're allowed to swear in on in the higher levels. We read here, Masonry has nothing to do with the Bible. It's not founded on the Bible. For if it were, it would not be Masonry. It would be something else. We read, and one of these, so we're talking about the Bible is part of the lodge, okay? So is the Hebrew Pentateuch in the Hebrew lodge, the Quran in a Mohammedan one, right? All of them belong in their own area. And one of these three books, the Bible, the Pentateuch, or the Quran, one of these, and the square and the compass, properly understood, are the great lights which a Mason must walk and work. Okay, you got to break that down. When you go into a lodge, it's going to have any book, right? Literally any book in the lower levels. But what they're said here is that only one of these are actually the book that contains the light. So is it the Hebrew Pentateuch? Is it the Christian Bible? Or is it the Quran? Right? One of these is what they base it on. Now, I'll save you the suspense. It's actually the Quran. So as you level up, they no longer swear in on the Pentateuch or the Bible anymore. They would only, which is, by the way, that's the Old Testament and the Old Testament and New Testament. Instead, they swear in the Quran. So we readily recognize, we read here, one of the grand masters of Freemasonry, Osiris of the Egyptians, Mithra of the Persians, Bacchus of the Greeks, right? All of these are essentially identified as the same. Okay, so they readily recognize pagan mystic religions, but not Christian religions. The mentality of Freemasonry is one of placing more importance on being Christ than finding Christ. A quote from the website Catholic.com, citing a link by this work on incarnation, it says, "For the Son of God became man so that we might become God." So their whole positioning, and again, this is from the Catholic website, by the way, their positioning is to make men into God. Manly Hall, 33-degree Masons, quote is saying, "Man is a God in the making." And when we start seeing, now granted, that's a statement that most people wouldn't come out, and say, because it's clearly blasphemous. But what's interesting is that the undertones of the same exact movement are found, right? The similar concept of manifesting, right? And this covers, these books that have direct Masonic and even straight out occult imagery, talking about manifesting law of attraction, a guided journal, manifesting with this, the satanic symbols on it, right? And then you can kind of pull it back a little bit, right? And then you can find the books that are, a little bit more like spiritualism light, right? Still teach the powers within you, still are teaching this law of attraction, the power of now, the secret, right? This idea that God, you are God, and you can attract anything you want. But what's sad is that this idea of manifestation is actually, full on into this, Joel Osteen type religion. And what's really scary about all this is how the paganism has crept into quote unquote Christianity. It's the same message. Now, I dive deeper in this in my course on enlightenment, so we're going to move past this. But just understand that yes, God does answer prayers, but and God is very generous. I can personally attest to that. But it's not because it's inside of me that I'm able to be rewarded. I don't attract wealth. I can't attract wealth. I can only accept the gifts that God gives me. We learn this in James 4:3, that if we ask and receive not, it's because we're asking for the wrong things, right? And we pray to satisfy our earthly desires, not the ones that will bring us closer to our heavenly goals. So the recap is that deceivers created false lights, and that we have to be clear and understand and be able to discern a true light from a counterfeit light. And there is one light, right? And then there's darkness. The false light is that's what's being spread is just darkness as a disguise. So the question is, how do we determine what is real and what is false? And we read here in Matthew 7, beware of the prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing. Right? Ultimately, what we identify is that by their fruits you shall know them. So we will ultimately identify what is false and what is true by the fruits, but it has to be more than that, because we need the leading of the Holy Spirit to impress upon us, because some things are going to be so deceiving that it says that they'll even deceive the very elect. So we need that close relationship with the Holy Spirit in order to understand what is true and what is not. We read, come out of her, my people, that you are not partakers of her sins. We also read that you were sometimes in darkness, but now you are the light of the world. So walk as children of the light. One last quote. It's that Jesus reminds us that if they persecuted him, they'll also persecute us. And so I just want to point out that the same individuals, the same bodies, which are claiming to want harmony and unity, are only wanting unity around the world and the world's standards, and that they will ultimately be used to persecute true light as it starts to shine brighter and brighter. Thanks, everybody. And again, if you haven't, if you feel free, if you want access to all my courses, not all of them are recorded yet, feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to give you more information on those and point you over to different initiatives that I'm starting right now. But with that, just pray for truly God's healing of our heart, to pray for discernment, and to just ask God that he chases away the darkness and allows us to discern the light. And I ask this in Jesus' name, and I thank him for answering this prayer. Amen.